Right now, watching and waiting. D.C. seemed to take a step closer to solving the government shutdown and debt limit messes. And then all eyes rest here as we hope and cross our fingers that sanity prevails in the 11th hour. We will get the very latest from the most reliable sources out there. Bob Cusack, managing editor of The Hill, gives us the view from The Hill and whether he or anybody can see a finish line before midnight tomorrow. And later, an American hero gets an overdue moment in the sun. A soldier's salute from his commander-in-chief as special technology lets us see an American hero in his finest hour. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you for joining us this Tuesday evening, October 15th. We'll have all that, and of course, a big election in New Jersey tomorrow coming up this hour. But we begin, or else but in Washington, where attention remains divided tonight. Most eyes on Congress waiting for word of a deal on the government shutdown and, arguably more importantly, the debt limit. With a few glances over at the clock, we are now just under 30 hours here until the bewitching hour. And with that, the nation reaches its borrowing limit sometime on Thursday. And at least there has been a lot of movement. I don't know about action, but movement on the Hill today, even if we still don't have anything to show for it. Andrew, where many people said, oh, this was typical dysfunction, silliness, stupidity. Now people are worried here because come the stroke of midnight tomorrow, for the first time in American history, we would have been crossed the threshold we never thought we would.
And yet you still have some of that dysfunction, silliness, and stupidity, Rich. Perhaps that's even blocking us from getting to a deal tonight. As you mentioned, we saw dueling proposals gather most of the attention in Congress today. First, something of a compromise offer from the Senate, eclipsed later by a new proposal from House Republicans. And tonight, no one really seems to know what will or won't happen next.
All right, buddy.
After a flurry of activity this morning, things settled down on Capitol Hill.
We're working with our members on our way forward.
We've been engaged in productive, bipartisan negotiations in the Senate.
Backroom meetings, closed-door negotiations, no major progress, but no movement backwards. The Senate is still working on a bipartisan deal that would reopen the government, but only until January 15th, and avoided default by extending the nation's credit limit, but only until February 7th. And here's the key, no major changes to the health care law. But House conservatives said that wouldn't go far enough. So they're pushing once again for a plan that includes tweaks to Obamacare, including eliminating health care subsidies for members of Congress and suspending the medical device tax for 2 years.
Now, for reasons that I don't quite understand, the Republicans want to, in the House of Representatives, again, want to sabotage the bipartisan effort in the Senate. And that will hit our economy hard, our global standing as well.
The White House issued a familiar warning.
The president's not going to pay ransom, from the American people to the Tea Party in order to open the government.
And there's word that the House will vote on its bill sometime tonight. No idea if it has the votes to pass or if Republican leaders even know how many votes they have. That vote has already now been delayed. Some reports, though, say Speaker Boehner is struggling for votes. There's also still no word on whether the House would vote on the Senate plan should it pass through the upper chamber. But two additional stories revealing parts of the GOP playbook today. The first on the timing, as one report stole a line from The Godfather to describe this. Louisiana Republican John Fleming on the record saying, quote, we want to make a deal that they can't refuse, and we're running out of time, and admitting, well, that the GOP interested in as much as default as in leverage. The quote, they're going to be more motivated to take this up, he said. Otherwise, they, the Democrats, may miss the Thursday deadline. And then just take this report as you will. Republicans in the House seriously considering this approach as the Thursday deadline comes. Politico writing, and I quote, there's discussion in the GOP caucus of voting on a bill and, if it passes, leaving town. A bid to try to force the Senate's hand. Despite all this, Wall Street taking the D.C. roller coaster somewhat in stride. All three major indices selling off today, but all doing so less than 1%. And the biggest moves came later in the day, far from the panic selling some had predicted. But late word after the markets closed, ratings agency Fitch saying the nation's AAA credit rating is now on rating watch negative, essentially a warning of a bad outlook and potential credit rating downgrade if the debt limit standoff is not resolved. Rich?
And for more, very pleased to be joined by Bob Cusack. Bob, the managing editor of The Hill, and he's joining us, of course, from our nation's capital. You know, Bob, whatever optimism, however tempered it was from yesterday, took a U-turn today. It just seems like the silly season in full effect in your city.
Absolutely. Richard, I mean, the House Republicans are coming up with a new plan. The Senate was working on a plan. They hadn't announced the deal. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of politics still being played on Capitol Hill. There's no deal that both parties have agreed to. And, of course, both parties are going to have to agree to a deal for it to get to President Obama's desk. So this is going to go on for a while, and it could go on through the weekend.
Bob, this is what I don't get. As McConnell and Reid negotiated, by all accounts, Boehner was in on the process. There's no way they crafted a deal and let everybody believe that they were nearing the goal line unless they thought that Boehner thought he could get this thing through. And then he comes back and forgetting that he didn't even try and sell the Senate plan, the House comes up with their own, and he doesn't even have enough votes within the Republican caucus to even pass that bill. Either somebody can't count votes or there's a whole lot of different agendas going on in the Republican House. What is going on among Republicans in the House? And we get stories that some are singing Amazing Grace here this morning. Some are going over to Tortilla Flats to Ted Cruz to start a coup. I don't know what he's doing. And then some others here are saying, you know, let's basically start all over from the 1 yard line. Can you give any idea about the different factions in the House and what they want among Republicans?
That's a great question of what they want. It has changed from Republicans at first in the House. They wanted to defund Obamacare, and then it was passing a delay of the individual mandate. Then a lot of them were talking about the medical device tax and repealing that. That is now out of the most recent plan. So it's going to be high drama tonight on Capitol Hill in the House. Can Boehner get the votes? If you look at really the last year or so, Boehner on high-profile bills has been unable to get to 218 votes. And Democrats are saying, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, the whip, saying almost no Democrats or very few will help Republicans. I think it's going to be closer to zero. So Republicans are going to have to carry this bill to the finish line, and they think they're going to get more leverage to get a better deal. But the clock is ticking. We're right at the deadline. The markets are already shaky. And the White House is saying we have to get a deal one way or the other very, very shortly.
Obviously, everything I'm saying is totally out of thin air. But, Bob, if you took a look at this afternoon in the markets, as you said, and let's posit that tomorrow markets go down 400 or 500 points if there's no movement. Is there anything that can scare the House folks to saying, and I heard that there was one theory going around, you're closer to me, that they, in effect, capitulate in the 11th hour, sign, and just leave town. Is there anything that can happen, whether it be on Wall Street or in D.C., that'll make them wave the white flag in the end and say, I don't agree, but for the betterment of the country, we're not going over the cliff?
I think Boehner eventually, and when I mean eventually, I think in the next 24 to 48 hours, is going to agree to something. But he's going to wait until the last possible second to get the best possible deal for him. But at the same time, if you look at the polls, you know, Richard, the Republicans have been taking a beating on this. So they're not going to get the better half of this deal. They're going to get maybe a quarter of what they want, and that's not going to be good enough for the Tea Party lawmakers. So they're going to need Democratic votes on the final bill. But that's the thing is, if John Boehner moves something that's bipartisan, it'll pass the House. It's just a question of how many Republicans defect. But I think the markets do move them. John Boehner has been more concerned about the debt ceiling than he was the government shutdown, because the financial markets, as you know, have basically shrugged at the shutdown. But the debt limit's a different story, and we saw in 2008 with the first TARP bill that went down on the House floor, the stock market plummeted almost 800 points. That spooked lawmakers, and since that time, they have not had a high-profile financial vote while the markets were open. So I think if tomorrow or the next day the markets plummet, that will accelerate the Republican cave on this.
Bob, I can't figure out my next question because I've interviewed some Tea Party folks on the Hill. I'm not sure if they really believe or they're just using for political leverage, but some actually believe that, hey, if we go over the debt cliff, no big deal here, and one even said it was going to be a market corrector. Do they believe that, or is this just high-stakes political drama?
I think a few of them do believe it. You know, they're a lot of these guys are not financial experts, and they're saying, hey, everyone said that the sky would fall if the shutdown happened. But we've had many shutdowns before. This is the first post 9/11 shutdown. But at the same time, the debt limit is something very different. And Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and their lieutenants, they do understand that this really could be a global catastrophe, Armageddon. And they are trying to do everything they can, especially McConnell. McConnell has a primary challenge. He has a tough general election challenge should he win the primary. He's been accused of stepping back and not leading. Well, now in recent days, he has been stepping up and working with Harry Reid. And I think when we come down to those last few days, maybe 12 hours before the deadline, I think McConnell and Boehner will say, okay, we have to get a deal. But the amazing thing is that the posturing still goes on just 2 days before the deadline.
Unbelievable. Hey, Bob, I appreciate a few minutes. I know you got a busy few days ahead of you. And I think potentially a couple scary days here, both from a precedent standpoint and just some dollar and cents, common sense here. Bob Cusack again from The Hill. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard.
All right. When we come back, we're going to get into this with our panel. As we said when we started tonight here, we're now under 30 hours into, for the first time in American history, America defaulting on its debts. We're going to get into what has to happen between now and then to avert it and what really the agendas are going on behind the scenes. Stay with us. Back after this.